Deep gratitude to you, Mr. Dhruva Mukherjee, CEO of ABP Group, for setting the tone for these next 3 days. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present to you the Futurist Keynote. And before I invite this gentleman onto the stage, a few words of introduction for him. Matthew Griffin, multi-award-winning futurist, has been described as a walking encyclopedia of the future by NASA and a futurist polymath. One of the world's most renowned futurists and strategic foresight experts, Matthew is the 15 times author of the blockbuster Codex of the Future series and is the founder and futurist-in-chief of the 311 Institute, a global futurist and de-futurist advisory firm working across the next 50 years. Matthew helped build and run several multi-billion-dollar businesses units and has a powerful reputation and a roster of clients that include royal households, world leaders, G7, G20, and G77 plus governments, and many of the world's most respected brands. Ladies and gentlemen, I will request all of you to put your hands together as I invite our futurist keynote speaker, Mr. Matthew Griffin, onto the stage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you. Right, how are you all? So that was loud, wasn't it? See, I might disrupt you all by bursting your eardrums. That's it. Then you won't be able to hear me, which, I mean, you might be fine. Some of you might be fine with that. So, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, a global futures and deep futures think tank. Now, I actually work across the next 50 years. I look at over 600 emerging technologies, hundreds of megatrends, and I'm the guy that organizations turn to when they want to figure out how they are going to be disrupted. Okay? And some of you are my clients. So, for example, we've got, where are we? We have Adobe. Adobe, we are reinventing the PDF. In addition to that, Adobe is being disrupted, or could be disrupted, by synthetic content, which underpins its creative suite. Now, when we have a look at Fortinet and Palo Alto, if you guys are in the room, on the one hand, you're being disrupted by an exponential growth in cybercrime, but using a kind of disruptive mindset, we have a new way to identify hackers and create impenetrable security systems. So we also have DXC, so welcome to DXC. They're trying to help organizations actually figure out how you manage this future and transform. And then we have everyone else. AWS, hello to AWS in the room. So we've been trying to figure out how we hack AWS. So, in this particular presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through sustainable disruption. But when I talk about sustainable disruption, this is very much angled at how do you constantly disrupt your own organization so that you can disrupt your competitors, enter new markets, and fundamentally become the leader in new markets. So, when we have a look at the future, when we have a look at today, have you noticed that there's only one thing changing? Yeah, from a human mental perspective, it's easy to get our heads around one thing, right? But actually, when we think about what's changing, it just happens to be absolutely everything. So, when we have a look at society, society is changing. We talk very much in terms of technology-led disruption, but actually a lot of the disruption that we see today isn't necessarily technology-led. Yeah, when we talk about technologies like generative artificial intelligence, we can see disruption coming. I started talking about generative artificial intelligence 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I was in London with Bloomberg talking about how these AIs that would create content would eventually be used to collapse financial markets and misinformation and disinformation. And then what, 2 years ago, people went, hey, where did this generative AI stuff come from? We can see disruption. We have economic disruption. So we see a decoupling of the world. And then we've got political disruption, which we won't even go there. Now, from a futures perspective, NASA has this orbital perspective. So when astronauts go into space, when they're 400 to 600 miles up, they see the world as this kind of rather simple, pale blue dot. There's no wars, there's no boundaries, everything is straightforward, right? But as we come down to Earth, the fact of the matter is, by 2040, we'll have 65% of people living in megacities. We have over 8 billion people now on the planet. It starts getting confusing when we get to ground. Cybercrime is a $1.2 trillion industry. We have activism and wars. We have all these challenges. And when we have a look at the problems that the world faces, we have 2.2 billion tons of trash every year. We have 57 gigatons of CO2 going into the Earth's atmosphere. 40% of the world's crops get destroyed. We have fires in the Arctic and in Siberia. Globally, we now have Category 6 hurricanes in Japan and in America. We have a new classification coming. But despite all of these challenges, all of these problems, we have pioneers that are developing new energy solutions. We're electrifying industries like ABP. We are growing food in new ways in vertical farms. We are educating our children in new things using new technologies and techniques. We have technology pioneers who are developing new emerging technologies. We have healthcare pioneers who will extend our lives in the year 28. And we, of course, are not only changing this world, but we're creating brand new virtual worlds. So today, from an opportunity perspective and a disruption perspective, we actually have 3 economies. We have the physical economy. I sold you a pair of physical Adidas trainers. We have the digital economy. I sold you a subscription. And then we have the virtual economy, which is where basically I can sell you virtual products. So there's lots of opportunity. Now, when we have a look at the future, when we have a look at the present day, how you think, feel, and act matters. If you looked at the video that I showed you, and you think that the future is a bleak place because we have climate change, we have 1 billion people who struggle to be fed at the end of every day, then you might be anxious and worried about the future. So how you think about the future affects how you feel about the future. And if you're anxious and worried about the future, then it's much more likely that in terms of the way that you act, you're going to go and lock yourself away in a room. However, if you look at the future and you think the future is full of opportunity, then you feel optimistic. And if you feel optimistic, then you're much more likely to try to go out and explore this future, figure out how it can benefit you, and what new things you can create to move into and or develop new markets. So how you think about something affects how you feel about it, and that fundamentally affects what you do. So reframe yourself. Now, I also recommend, these are kind of the core attributes, you need to expand your thinking. The vast majority of disruptions don't come from within your own industry. If you think about the oil and gas industry, do you really think that the oil and gas industry was ever invested in moving away from fossil fuels? When you have a look at the automotive industry, do you ever think that Mercedes said, you know what, we've been building cars with internal combustion engines for 100 years. It's time for us to do things differently. disruption generally comes from the places that you least expect. And when we actually have a look at the automotive manufacturers, Mercedes invented the car. They have a market capitalization of $65 billion. You could argue that Tesla reinvented the car. They have a market capitalization approaching $1 trillion. When you look at disruption as an opportunity rather than a threat, the upsides, the revenues, the share prices, the shareholder returns are staggering. Once you've looked across different industries to see what they're doing, once you've looked across different countries, India disrupts differently to China. China disrupts differently to the United States or Europe. So when we talk about expanding your horizons, don't just think about looking at what other industries are doing, look at what other countries are doing, and then bring those pieces back. Then start experimenting. If you found something interesting, experiment. Because you can't really ever understand these new things if you aren't using them yourselves. And then you have to unlearn. The way that we are creating businesses now is fundamentally different to anything that we've seen in the past. And I'm going to show you a video in a little while of just exactly why you need to unlearn everything that you've learned about the world. Now, from a disruption perspective, we can kind of define disruption like this. Disruption is a radical change to the status quo. Plain and simple. But the fact of the matter is, you get disrupted for two reasons, as a business and as a country as well. You get disrupted because you disrupted yourself. You saw disruption, you did the due diligence on it, you experimented, and then you acted. And so you disrupt yourself and you move into a new market. Or you were disrupted because you saw it coming and you just didn't bother to do anything about it. We can forgive not seeing disruption, but if you're an organization that saw disruption coming and you simply sat on your butt and did nothing about it, then that's on you. But disruption also comes from anywhere. Now, when we're having a look at the future, ultimately, these are the three things that you need in order to be more successful, or even massively successful. Firstly, you need a vision. So what is the vision of your company? Now, for example, if we have a look at Apple, Apple's vision for itself as a company is in 10 to 20 years' time, Apple do not want to be known as a smartphone manufacturer. They want to be known as a health company. So this week, Tim Cook came out and said, we no longer want to be known as a smartphone company. When people look back in time at what Apple is in the year 2025, 2030, we want to be known as a healthcare company. Now, on the one hand, that's a massive shift. It's a massive market. It's a new vision. Apple will only achieve that new vision if they have the right culture. Because if Tim Cook says, we want to be a healthcare company, and no one else in the company says, I agree with you, let's be on this journey with you, they'll fail. There is a reason why company culture is called the corporate immune system. Because if you want to kill change, having a toxic culture is the fastest way to kill your company. That's 80% of the battle. And then the rest of the battle, the other 20%, is doing. You've got your vision, you've got your culture sorted out and aligned, now you need to get on with stuff. So here's a tale of two companies. I ran IBM's public safety and national security business back in the day. IBM saw this new technology coming along, technology called cloud computing. Cloud computing was fundamentally disruptive to about $50 billion worth of IBM's managed outsourcing business, the big data centers, the strategic outsourcing stuff. And so as we saw the rise of AWS and Microsoft, IBM did nothing. IBM had a market capitalization of $110 billion. As IBM sat there and sat there and sat there, eventually AWS, Google, Cloud, and Microsoft became the market leaders. IBM lost half of its market value and then started splitting itself up. IBM saw disruption coming, had a problem doing the due diligence and quantifying it, and then I'd argue had the wrong culture. Now let's look at Accenture. Accenture saw a different kind of technology revolution coming through. They saw digital transformation. So they invested early. They built out capabilities, they hired people, they bought companies. They invested really quite heavily in trying to be the market leader in a market that at that point didn't really exist. They built their capability up over time, and over time, over the space of about 7 years, Accenture, who saw disruption coming, did their due diligence, took it seriously, and tried to get ahead of it, ended up tripling their company revenues from $20 billion to $60 billion. It's not that you aren't seeing disruption coming. It's your culture that makes all of the difference, and then the actions that you take. Now let's have another story of two giants. So both of these are my clients, Samsung and Huawei. 10 years ago, I sat down with the vice president of Huawei CRI in London. And he said, in 10 years' time, what do you think the worst thing that Huawei could be? And I said, well, a hardware company. About 4 years later, we started putting together plans for Harmony OS, which is essentially the Huawei and Chinese equivalent of the Google Play Store. Huawei as an organization has seen terrific disruption. Not only have they been banned from buying American chips and products, they've been banned from markets, and they've had their 5G telecommunications gear literally ripped out of the American market and the European market. However, both Samsung and Huawei have two things in common. Huawei spend $15 billion a year on research and development, and they have 45,000 people looking at not just the next technology, but N+2, N+3, N+4 technologies up to 50 years out. The other client is Samsung. So Samsung in South Korea have a campus called the Chaos Campus. They have 3,000 people who are expressly dedicated to trying to destroy the company. Because if you know how to destroy your own company, then you know how to disrupt your company. You know where your competitors and new competitors will come from, and you can develop the plans and the visions that you need to either avoid disruption or to lead disruptive change. So between Huawei and Samsung, they are relatively unique globally because they are always trying to tear their own companies down so that they can build the new thing. Now, from a disruption perspective, I mentioned that disruption isn't just purely technological. How ambitious are you? It's all very well having a vision, but especially in India, consumer market of 1.5 billion people, record levels of foreign direct investment in the country, excellent talent. How ambitious are you? And do you just realize the kinds of ambition that you're actually up against? Because if you've ever heard of Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which is now a what, $150 billion startup AI company, I would argue that Sam Altman's ambition is greater than all of your ambitions. So I'm going to put this into perspective. In 2028, Sam Altman believes that OpenAI will be able to create artificial general intelligence. Now, AGI, we estimate, will have an IQ of about 1,600, 1 billion times more general knowledge than any human, and a learning speed of approximately 3 trillion times faster than any human. Now, Sam Altman categorizes AGI as the point in time where artificial intelligence is capable of outperforming all humans at all economically valuable work. So think about ChatGPT and GPT-5 that are expert enterprise coders. So on the one hand, Sam Altman could own, literally own, the entire global services industry, where AI configures networks, autonomous artificial intelligence systems manage your cybersecurity, where AI does your software development, it does your product development and everything else. But when I talk about ambition, what if you owned an artificial intelligence that could make multi-billion-dollar businesses? This is Sam at a JP Morgan event.
Highly performant, smaller teams, thanks to these tools and these technologies, are going to be able to do so much more. Is that a trend you're seeing from the startups growing around y'all in Cerebral Valley?
We're going to see 10-person billion-dollar companies pretty soon, like billion-dollar valuations. And the thing that in my little group chat with my tech CEO friends, there's this betting pool for the first year that there's a one-person billion-dollar company, which would have been unimaginable without AI, and now will happen.
I'm so happy you said that, because I literally just wrote that out in a letter to my LPs for an AGM. This is a radical idea, and it gets even more exciting when you remember none of us ever, or all of us who have built companies to even more than 100 people, don't miss back when it was smaller. And I think there's going to be a new drug, the exact opposite of that ZERB phenomenon, where CEOs and founders are going to just be so excited to get up and go to work with much smaller, much more performant, much more stronger culturally teams. And I'm also kind of bummed I'm not on that CEO group chat, but we can table that for later. But I think this feels like a seminal moment, and I get you all are not sitting around patting yourselves on the back, but it's a big deal.
So I've shown you a video of an individual saying, I am basically creating an artificial intelligence that will be able to create a multi-billion-dollar business that is run by one person. It's going to start in the tech sector. It's going to kind of be a digital company. So I think software development, think agentic artificial intelligence. As you're building out your own businesses, I've shown you a disruption. Now, at Harvard, we used AI to build 70 autonomous businesses. Within 7 minutes, we built an enterprise CRM system for $1. I've shown you how you can be disrupted. What's your play? Now, when we talk about technology-led disruption, the rate of innovation is accelerating. In Germany, we used an artificial intelligence to develop a brand new rocket engine that's 3D printable, and we developed it in 6 hours. So I start disrupting the global rocket industry. What's your play? Google DeepMind has an artificial intelligence that can create new vaccines in 7 minutes. In Silico, in Australia, uses an artificial intelligence to create 30,000 new medical drugs in 21 days. Speed is also a disruptor, because it used to be the case that you had time to see this stuff coming, and you had time to understand it, get a point of view, think about what it meant for your businesses, how it would impact you, and then develop a strategy. In the past, you might have had 10 years to see this coming, develop a strategy, and build out new capabilities in your response. Now, you might have a month. We've got artificial intelligence with Google and NVIDIA building the next generation of GPUs and AI accelerator chips. If you are investing in the Indian semiconductor marketplace, what happens when your competitors are using a technology multiplier that means they can create new AI accelerator chips every week? Then we have AIs generating code. Then we have this. Synthetic content. How many of you watch Bollywood films? Yeah, we like Bollywood films. Now, 10 years ago, I showed how artificial intelligence was going to be creating content. So artificial intelligence is now starting to get to the point where it can make a relatively decent movie. And over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll just be able to say, create a brand new Bollywood movie for me in the style of X with a plot of Y, and it will create the video, it will create the content. Bollywood, if it is not very careful, on the one hand is going to be disrupted. Content creation is being disrupted. But secondly, Bollywood will see price collapse. Because how many of you in the audience today have the budget to create a blockbuster Bollywood movie? No? No hands up? Oh. Evidently we need some CEOs in the room. Now, artificial intelligence via synthetic content generation drops the cost of making a movie from, say, $100 million to 0. In 5 years' time, your kids will be able to make a good Bollywood movie, put it onto YouTube and say, hey, here we go. Bollywood will face price collapse and disruption. Now, in addition to this, this also gives us a new lesson in disruption. When it comes to disruption, distribution matters. The reason why OpenAI penned a deal with Apple for free wasn't because they wanted to give Apple access to ChatGPT for free. No, no, no. It was because Apple gave them distribution to 1 billion devices. Distribution is your moat. Think about Reliance Jio and so on and so forth. Distribution is your moat. Now, when it comes to disruption, we talk about technology-led disruption. But if you go to any investor and you say, I've created a brand new drink, and I want to put that drink into every supermarket, the first thing that every investor will say will be, it's a packed market, you stand absolutely no chance of disrupting Pepsi, Coca-Cola, etc., right? The drinks market is absolutely packed. And yet Prime disrupted the global drinks market. They now have revenues of $1.2 billion. They did it because they leveraged their YouTube fame. We call it playground marketing. They created a drink and then they used playground marketing across social media to disrupt the global drinks industry. Jio. I see disruption as a game of chess. So Reliance Jio, in 2015-2016, thought, how do we dominate the Indian telecommunications market? And I mean, you should probably already know this. What they did is they gave away a lot of 4G SIMs. So can you now imagine the CEO conversation saying, I want us to be the biggest Indian telecoms operator in the future. How are you going to do that? I was going to give away hundreds of millions of 4G SIMs, or millions of 4G SIMs. At what point does the board and the CFO say, you're an idiot? Giving stuff away? Absolutely no. And yet here's the play. Jio gave away millions of 4G SIMs. It has a market now of 15 billion. It's got 470, 480 million Indian customers. But that's the start. The next move for Reliance Jio was then to create Jio Financial Services, payments on all these mobiles that you have. So now Jio starts disrupting the Indian financial services market. Then they move out of India. Then they start moving basically into Southeast Asia and other places. Disruption is sometimes a game of chess. Temu. If you step back about 5 to 10 years ago, everyone in the boardroom would say, when we're having a look at the future and when we're having a look at disruption, what would Amazon do? What would the big tech giants do? Now, when we have a look at the grocery space and the retail space, if I told you that we have a way to disrupt Amazon, what, $200 billion company, people would be saying, as a startup, we cannot possibly disrupt Amazon. So what we have is we have social media applications which we start turning into super apps. Within those social media platforms, we embed payments, we embed commerce, and all sorts of other things. In TikTok, Temu have inserted themselves into TikTok natively. TikTok has about 1 billion users now. Did you know that Temu was started in 2022? 2 years ago. This year, it's going to have revenues of $54 billion because they disrupted Amazon by embedding themselves into super apps. This is a disintermediation play. When we have a look at financial fintechs like Revolut, Revolut now has a market capitalization of $54 billion, and everyone looks at Revolut and says, which is a little bit like RuPay, but everyone looks at fintech, at Revolut and says, they're a fintech. They are not a fintech. Revolut is a super app. And then when you have a look at On, I've seen some of you wearing these. On tried to sell their trainers, tried to sell the company to Nike. This year, On will have revenues of $2.6 billion. If I said, I'm going to disrupt Nike and Adidas with a new trainer, people will say, well, no, you're not going to make a dent. They built a community. In terms of identifying new markets, moving into new markets, and dominating new markets, it's not always about technology. It's about vision and strategy and then execution. Now, from a leadership perspective, leaders need to have two brains. So there's functional leadership, which is how do you get the most from the organization that you have today? How do you execute lean? How do you sharpen the saw in corporate geek speak? And then you need entrepreneurship or enterprise leadership. So enterprise leadership is very much about thinking about what's coming next, what do we want to be when we grow up. Increasingly, when you have a look at the world's most valuable companies, they are what we call ambidextrous organizations. Now watch this next video, and tell me how many industries this 1-minute experiment disrupts.
Velocity. Oh, we can see it coming down through the plume.
You probably know the company.
Booster coming in hot for booster catch. We're going to ignite 13 of those Raptor engines, and this view is incredible right now. You can see how fast this vehicle is moving on the left-hand side. Landing burn, 13 ignited. We're now down to 3 Raptor engines. We can see those chopsticks now in here.
That was a great experiment. Now, SpaceX is an example of an ambidextrous organization. They have the successful Falcon 9 rockets, but they are increasingly creating this. This is the Space Heavy. It's a heavy lift launch vehicle. How many industries does that help Elon Musk disrupt? Is it 1? So hands up for 1. No. Is it 2? Okay. Is it 3? You're either not putting your hands up or you're very confident about this. Is it 4? Okay. This disrupts at least 4 industries. Now, it disrupts the space launch industry because it drops the cost of launching stuff into space 100-fold. It disrupts the military logistics industry because you start moving military equipment from one side of the planet to the other in 45 minutes. As the costs come down, it disrupts civil aviation. So we have Tata in the room. Tata actually own Air India, bought in 2021. What happens when SpaceX start moving people from one side of the planet to the other for the cost of a commercial airline ticket? Because that is Musk's vision. However, in addition to that, we just talked about Reliance Jio. Why do you need a 4G or 5G phone if this helps Elon Musk launch 22,000 satellites into low Earth orbit, cheaper than ever before, to then provide every individual in India with space-based satellite-to-phone 5G capabilities? This, most people will see this as a reusable rocket, but this disrupts at least 4 industries. In time, it also disrupts the space-based manufacturing industries, healthcare, semiconductors, and all sorts of things, because increasingly we're manufacturing things in zero gravity in space. So, in terms of proactive leadership, you need to think about what do you want to achieve versus avoid. If you're thinking, how do we avoid going bust or bankrupt, then you're thinking tactically. If you're thinking, how do we achieve more, you're thinking strategically. You need to think, see, and plan long term. All of the largest organizations are increasingly looking at the long term because the markets are huge, like Elon Musk. Elon Musk isn't thinking, how do I disrupt Reliance Jio's mobile services in India? He will just run over Jio. And so Jio need a play, which they will probably have a play. But also, when you're looking at new product development, you need to think, what new products and services can we be building for Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3? So short, medium, and long term. Because this is your roadmap. And then as you end up figuring out what your Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 products and services are, you can start building out your future capability. And increasingly, if I say to you, opportunity is not your problem, how many of you think that you have no opportunities in India, let alone anywhere else? You are not opportunity constrained. You have too much opportunity in front of you. Your actual problem is, how do you align the capital, the culture, the organizational structures and resources to move into new markets, do new things in new ways, and disrupt your competitors? And then when we finally have a look at core behaviors, embrace change and ambiguity, because everything's getting faster. Everything is changing. Take risks. If you are not willing as an organization or as an executive group to take risks, you will get run over by someone else. And you need to get uncomfortable. Because if you are comfortable, then you're happy with the status quo. And while you're happy with your status quo, you have Sam Altman looking at your businesses going, I'm going to take you all out. And then at some point, you're going to be uncomfortable. You've got to be curious. You've got to ask better questions. Go everywhere, talk to everyone. You've got to be open-minded. Because I said we have Palo Alto and Fortinet in the room. With one of them, we are now starting to identify malware using sound. Because using artificial intelligence, we can identify the sound that malware makes when it's running on your hard drives and your CPUs. Be open-minded. I can disrupt every Indian bank with a fridge, which is maybe a story for later. And then, of course, basically from an acting perspective, you need to grow outside the core. So companies that have done this, this is where you leverage your existing capabilities as an organization. So AWS is an example of this. So Amazon Retail was using huge amounts of compute. And at some point, Jeff Bezos thought, why don't we repurpose that compute to the cloud? AWS was born. Disney. Have you noticed that Disney is doing lots of franchises now? You've got all kinds of different franchises that are coming out, but each character within the franchise now has its own series. That has increased Disney's revenues like crazy. And then new growth engines. Ørsted was a fossil fuel company in Norway. They are now the world's largest renewable energy company, especially in wind. Google's a search engine. Except Google is increasingly becoming a healthcare company. They're building new capabilities. In the UAE wants to 3D print all new buildings by 2030. So when we talk about building new growth engines, next year, try to get 2% of your revenues from a new business that you don't have today. And then the year after that, it's 4%, then it's 10%, then it's 20%. So next year, try to get 2% of your revenues from something you're not doing today. And then move at speed. Disruption is increasingly rapid. And while most of you think you can probably move at speed, if I said to you, I've identified a brand new market opportunity. It's a $1 trillion market opportunity. It's just sitting there waiting for you to take it. You will tell me you can move into that market really quickly. Prove it. Because most of you won't be able to move into that market very quickly at all. And then, finally, it's never too late to move. One of my clients is Nokia. They are the literal case study for an organization that was horribly, horribly, publicly disrupted. And I was with them about 2 months ago, and the culture of the company is now very much, we can sit where we are, and we can, as Nokia, continue to bring in revenues of about $2 billion from our patent portfolio. However, over time, that patent portfolio revenue is going to decline. We have to move. We have to be disrupting ourselves. We have to be looking at new opportunities. So the entire culture of Nokia is all about doing new things, finding new opportunities, and then getting as much from those opportunities as they can. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed that.